Hello, people. I believe a lot of you have heard about blockchain, and yeah, there are a lot of nice technologies, but they have some issues as well. And Deb Nicholson will speak about the ethical considerations of blockchain. She's from Software Freedom Conservancy, and I believe you will have a good introduction to this topic from her. Have fun.
Thank you. Awesome. It's great to be here at FOSDEM, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys about blockchain. I am not a blockchain hater, but after 13 years of working in free software, I'm always suspicious of new technology, right? So we should always be a little suspicious and, you know, read the back of the box, so to speak, which I guess is also known as source code. But so I'm neither a hater nor like a super fan, but I have some questions and some concerns. And I know when we say blockchain, I don't know how many people are in this room, but I'm pretty sure there are that many number of ideas of what we mean when we say blockchain. So there are a lot of different things. I'm going to speak generally, and I'm not going to call out specific coins or specific efforts, but to think of, like, I want us to think about the technology in general and what heading in that direction means for us as technologists and what our responsibility is. So the promise of blockchain is pretty great. Like, most technology that people get excited about sounds pretty great on the front end, of course. Transparency in financial dealings and other dealings, that sounds pretty great. Like, I know anyone who's like had a mobile phone has probably been like, what the heck does this contract mean, and why do I keep getting these extra fees? So if you could have transparency with some of your other financial dealings, that would be a real bonus. The other thing is decentralization. I spent a long time working on GNU Media Goblin because I care deeply about decentralization. I have a lot of worries about what the continual centralizing of online stuff means for us, and, you know, having I'm a huge science fiction fan. I've read a lot of books where there's like 3 companies that control the entire world. And when I first started reading those books, I was like, oh man, that's ridiculous. That would never happen. But it turns out that it's going to be 5. So I have concerns. Like, the decentralized power is a real bonus for me when we talk about the way that blockchain could work, right? And then efficiency. Like, as a person who's done a lot of nonprofit work, I've done a lot of office work. I've done a lot of like work on systems that were designed by someone else who never intended to use them. And I'm like, how come we have to type this in twice? And it's like, oh, because the person who designed the system is never going to type anything in here. So efficiency, the idea of making mundane transactions, especially mundane accounting transactions, more efficient, like, sings to my soul. I imagine that there are office employees which, if we could gather up all of their wasted work, we could probably build 1,000 pyramids. With staplers probably, but you know what I mean. It's so the efficiency part I like. Well, we're going to talk about the past, and we're going to talk about ledgers, which have been around for a really long time. One thing that I found really interesting is that before like the 15th century, we had like a huge mess as far as accounting systems. Like, everyone had their own thing. Like, oh, I write on sticks. Like, oh, I like to notch sticks. I like to keep stuff on paper. Like, oh, I like to write down like every day like what happened. And then you just flip back through like the whole like last 4 years to see who owes what. So this guy invented double entry accounting, which you know, it's not the most exciting invention. So, like, you know, he's not like, there's not like statues like there are of like Galileo and things like that. But double entry accounting was this huge early interoperability thing. It meant that like your books and my books, we could get the same thing going from one to the other. It's like, oh, here's the list of credits on mine and the list of debits on mine, same thing on yours, as opposed to like, what do I do with these sticks? How do I know that those mean I owe you money? That seems weird. So this was great. for everyone who could read. For folks who can read, written down ledgers are awesome. If you can't read, which wasn't everyone in the 14th century, then you still can't really look at the system of debits and credits and have confidence that the person who is telling you you owe them money is being honest, which is a shame. So that is that is a tricky thing. So when we think about replacing a lot of our existing systems with blockchains, it's incumbent on us to make sure that everyone has access to it, like a sort of literacy, like a contract literacy. Especially if we're going to like transcend local government and have a situation where people are just sort of beholden to the system and not without like some of the governmental controls that exist in their specific location. Hammurabi did this early. Before Hammurabi, the rules of the land were at the whim of the king. You could get brought in for any offense, and then the punishment could be anything. Hammurabi wrote down, like, if you steal, you lose a hand. If you kill someone, well, it wasn't, I don't want to make it sound like it was this great egalitarian thing. It was like, if you kill someone who is rich, you die. If you kill someone who's poor, you have to give up a cow. It wasn't perfect. But at least you knew what it was. It was written down. And so it was like transparency. So I think about the kinds of things that we might codify and wanting to make sure that the folks that we codify those things for, are able to understand what we've done. Because one person's like just business is another person's like very personal tragedy or emptying of their bank account or even a massacre. It could be like, oh, for me it's just business. So when I think about like, what we might make efficient, it's really important that like we understand what just business means for all of the members of that transaction. And some of the things that we've normalized with ledgers and treaties and things in the past are things that probably should not have been normalized. So this is a painting of the Treaty of Penn, which is the eastern part of the United States. So the Native people are signing a contract here saying like, yes, all of this land, you can do stuff on it. Was there an equal understanding of how long that contract was intended to last or how exclusive that contract was intended to be? Almost certainly not. So you've got like, but it's a contract. So like, later folks can go back and be like, well, your signature's on this. This is a contract. And, it's just business. And they're like, wait, I don't understand. So our understanding of what is up for grabs and what's saleable might not match people that we're able to interact with on the other end. So that, and there's always a possibility for a real imbalance in power. So I talked about the mobile contracts earlier, but there are a lot of things like that. Like this room might have a higher than average number of people that actually read terms of service. How many? Oh, just a little higher than average. They're boring. My dad's a lawyer. He doesn't read them either. But so for contracts that update over time, the party who's drafted the contract and has the domain-specific expertise is always going to write them in their favor. So it'll be like, oh, the rate will increase according to this particular parameter that as the company with like several hundred people employed looking at this market understand very well how that will tip. Whereas the individual person looking at that contract might be like, yeah, I guess like more service, I pay a little more, that seems okay, like without really understanding the mechanisms by which that will happen. And that could be very, very efficient. It could like, boom, because that's what we want from blockchain, is for it to be very, very efficient. So I worry about the things that we might make normal and the kinds of transactions that we could provide cover for in systems. And I know they're not all anonymous. Some are, some are not. It depends on, well, it depends on how much you're willing to put in, right? But it's incumbent on us as the people creating these platforms to understand what we might be making it easy for something to be normal. And then, so if we change the rules, new rules mean new responsibilities. And that means that we have to do some sort of Hammurabi-esque thing where we make it clear what the new rules are. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, like stuff that I've been just thinking about stuff that could happen or that has already happened. We have new kinds of things that could happen. One of the things that people are always talking about is oh, we're finally gonna throw off the tyranny of government, which is okay. I mean, so is this cat stealing? I mean, it didn't pay for pizza. I don't know any cats that have money. But, most of us would be as a illegal activity, I guess I don't care, right? And there are a lot of things in that category where it's I guess I don't care if people want to do that. It may interest you to know that people have been using ledgers to falsify all kinds of activities. So this is an interesting example where in the US, trucks, they drive across countries, it's really big, and they keep a ledger talking about how much they've slept. And this is supposed to keep the other motorists safe so that everyone knows oh, well, you should have slept this much. But they keep two ledgers because you make more money if you go across faster and you don't have to split the pay for the trip with a second driver. So what happens is they keep two sets of ledgers. So we might, by having stuff that is a little bit more anonymized on the inputs, be able to see situations where people could thwart local law. And you might think well, I know how much sleep I need. Why's the government got to get involved? But when the balance on that on the other end is a 18-wheeler going across the median and plowing into a bunch of cars, and it's well, we perhaps have an interest there that we would want to keep in track. So there are legitimate reasons for having government control on things. And so I worry about the things where people are oh, it's fine, I'm good. The government doesn't need to keep track of me. I can just do these things because it doesn't always work. So, transparency and control and efficiency. There's always going to be competing interests here, and I think that we may find that there are a lot of things that we agree on. We might not agree on some things, but perhaps understanding where we've been and what's happening now, we can extrapolate and hopefully avoid some of the things that we all agree would be bad. What if we end up accidentally coding a dystopia? And I said that, it's it used to sound crazy, right? Oh, we're just going to have 3 companies run the world. And it's oh, didn't work out as crazy as I thought. What if we, oh, I didn't mean to accidentally code a new feudal regime where, everyone is beholden to, a particular company. Or, I didn't mean to accelerate capitalism so that we ended up with, people living in underground bunkers and then, 10 billionaires. I think we still have 20, so we may be doing okay. And I don't think anyone in this room, if it was a button that said dystopia plus a bonus of $500, not code the dystopia, would pick the $500. It's never going to be that obvious. But some of the things that we lay down in technology at the early stages end up perpetuating. So this symbol is an example of something that got used temporarily just to go oh, okay, we'll put the @ symbol in the middle of the email. And I had actually never thought about this, but there are people that find it bothersome. And in fact, the person who first put the @ symbol into our email has since apologized. He's I'm so sorry, I didn't realize we were all gonna have to type this forever in our email for the end of days. So when email was created, it was oh, what's going to happen? And it's well, let's just try this for now. And now we're never going to get rid of the @ symbol. So some of the choices that we make early on may have repercussions later on, more serious ones. I actually don't mind the @ symbol. So where are we now? We have folks, nerdy folks using blockchain. Awesome. And it's fun. We have a lot of people doing speculation, which, the tulip metaphor is like, okay, yeah. But what I think about is like who actually benefits from speculation. Like, I actually don't care if very wealthy people want to like play games with money and lose like yachts and stuff to each other. I don't have a yacht, so there's not a whole lot of like, oh, that's sad, you lost one of your yachts. But a lot of these kinds of schemes, there are a lot of folks who are susceptible to these get-rich-quick schemes. Like, I don't know how many of you have aging parents where you've gotten to the point where they can't spend money without someone else seeing it. But people become susceptible to these things. I worked at this was a gross job, but I worked at a place where we called people on the phone and asked them for money. And there was a company you could buy lists from of people who specifically are susceptible to get-rich-quick schemes. And they're like, oh, these people work for a couple years and then lose their whole fortune over and over and over again because they just know they're never going to be rich the regular way. So so there are people who can be exploited when there are systems that promise like great rewards, just read this very dense 70-page contract, and then wait a few weeks and you'll probably be rich. So there's a lot of potential for exploitation there. Another thing I thought was interesting is because the end-to-end situation with blockchains provides a certain certainty of like what's happening in the network. This is iPay, and it's intended for people who are fleeing a country as a refugee, so they can take their bank account with them, and the key is their eye. Which I guess it's better than the situation where you don't get to take your money with you at all, but it also creates kind of this gross, weird market for eyes. Because you can't, so your password gets hacked, right? Okay, you change it. Like, you can only do that once if you have two eyes. And then you're out of eyes. I don't know about you, but when I watch movies and they take someone's eye out for like a, I worry about the ways they're like, oh, it's great. Like a unholy mashup of biometrics and blockchain has some problems. I have to point that. There's been a lot of talk about like hackers and dark web and people using blockchains to money launder and do all kinds of transactions. Many of those people have been caught because they didn't understand the traffic analysis situation. They're like, oh, I just made my name like elite hacker, money launderer 72. But then like actual money goes into my bank account from some country that's very far away from where I live. So of course that looks suspicious. The money launderers who didn't get caught, I don't know, maybe they're using Zcash now or something else. Or maybe they've seen the light and stopped laundering money. Nah, no one believes that. So people are using some of the blockchain systems for nefarious purposes, right? And then I'm also kind of worried that most of the blockchain or most of the Bitcoin money, when we talk about those applications, are in just a couple of places. Not quite one, maybe 9, somewhere maybe between those. I think it's like 3 top coins, but it's not like when I think about this promise of decentralization, I wasn't picturing replacing like 3 companies running the world with like 3 Bitcoin companies running the world. So we haven't quite gotten to a place where we have a lot of like smaller coins that are really gaining a lot of traction. And then, of course, the government's been spending a lot of time looking at like, how can they use this blockchain thing? They're like a little more savvy. I think the internet, they didn't catch on for a little bit, but governments largely understand the internet now, and they also largely understand blockchain, and they've gotten really good at doing the traffic analysis for those systems that provide encryption from end to end and figuring out how to find the endpoints. And of course, we have to talk about the massive power usage. We'll talk about a little bit some of the ways to ameliorate that. But you know, and I know there's a couple of you thinking like, but fiat power, I mean, fiat money also uses power. And it's like, yes, it does. But if we're going to do more, bigger, complicated things, and we want more people to be using blockchains and Bitcoins for their stuff, then we're going to have massive power usage, and we're going to have to address that. And some folks are like, what about Quebec? They set up a whole thing over there by the hydroelectric thing. Like hydro actually is, well, it's better than nuclear power because it probably won't blow up and create like a Chernobyl-like system. But hydro floods huge piles of land and disrupts habitats, displaces people, all kinds of stuff. So hydro is not like a perfect magic. You know, we could talk about solar. I was thinking about, you know, solar blockchains. Like that might be okay, right? Yeah, so the power thing is an issue. So what we talk about when we talk about improving blockchain, and there are a lot of talks about it. They're like, this is a meeting about blockchain. Obviously, we can all go home, they fixed it. No, but there are like a ton of groups that are looking at, you know, how to do smart contracts for humanitarian stuff. These folks are looking at like policy, especially in European Union. The MIT Sloan School, which is their business school, so MIT is largely known for its tech stuff, so they have this tech and business like kind of experiment going on. And then the Institute for Blockchain Studies at Purdue. So there's so many different iterations and ideas out there. Like the sheer volume of academic papers on blockchain and what it could do and what it might do it's staggering. It's like there's like so much stuff. But nobody actually has anything that I think addresses some of the core things with blockchain, which is that both the proof of stake and the proof of work end up as this very efficient mechanism to make it easy for the richer participants to become richer, while the poorer participants don't. And so, in my mind, like the thing that we are making efficient, if all we are making efficient is a system where rich people get richer, they don't need our help. They're actually doing really good already. I don't know if you've noticed. I don't want to put a picture of like, you know, Jeff Bezos up or anything, but like, they don't really need our help getting richer. So none of those academics are looking at it from that direction. They're all kind of thinking about like, oh, well, what kinds of smart contracts shall we have? Or like, you know, how shall we go and take the blockchain to the rest of the world? You know, so I'm worried that we're not looking at the things that we ought to be looking at. So the contract, we talked a little bit about how contracts, if you're not like contract literate, which I don't know how we ended up in a society with like a whole profession that is dedicated to writing dense, non-human readable contracts, but here we are. Even if the transactions are transparent and easy to understand, if the contract itself is not easy to understand, then we have problems. The nodes, this is another thing like, oh, you can't game the coins and the blockchain systems because you would have to take over 51% of the network. Well, you can actually do that. And it turns out now it only needs to be 34% of the network. So the nodes, like the idea that individually they couldn't take over the network, but collectively they could. So there are some issues there to look at. And a lot of the blockchain systems take that into account as like, you know, just a cost of doing business. Like the network will be attacked every so often and we'll lose a chunk of money and, you know. So there are people talking about how do we spread that, you know, system out with the nodes so that we're more robust and less likely to be hacked. And then this one is very interesting, especially with some of the less, like, not the Bitcoin stuff, but other places where you're like, oh, we're going to do these contracts, or we're going to try and set up these, systems that will help people in more remote places, things like that. The initiator, that's like the beginning of the chain, right? So, like, if you couldn't get things in and you couldn't get things out, like, nobody would really care about any of the blockchain stuff, because what use would it be? It would just be this theoretical exercise. But at some point, it has to start in the real world, and so you have like a like a situation where, like, what if nobody's seen the initial input? So you've taken an initial input that maybe no one's seen, and then put it into a system that is then like, this is inviolably accurate. Like, we can guarantee that it is completely, what you're looking at is completely correct, except for the very first step, which is actually a really big one. So the land in Florida, if you don't know, this was like people went to Florida as part of a weird part of the U.S. That mostly looks like this, actually. Not like Miami Vice. There is that too, but most of it looks like this. And so people went back up to like New England and the Midwest and said, hey, I bought land in Florida. It's amazing. And they showed them this picture of a beach and stuff. And they're like, it's too bad you weren't able to get in on this deal with me. And then the other person's like, oh, I wish I had bought land in Florida. And they're like, well, I did buy 2 plots, so I can maybe sell you 1. And then they sold it, like, it became this huge thing where each of them sold, at an upsell over and over again. So, like, eventually someone went down and was like, I own a swamp full of angry alligators, and I paid, like, half the cost of my house for it. And the alligators won't even leave. So you end up with this, so what I'm saying is that the initial point from the real world that goes in and then becomes codified and certified and guaranteed to be correct is important. So that's one of the things that we look at. So the future. So, I want us to think, what kind of future are we building with these new technologies? And, a lot of people are like, we're building this amazing paradise. It's going to be fantastic. I can't wait to throw off the tyranny of government and, sit in a hammock. It's going to be great. And I like hammocks, don't get me wrong. Or we're going to be rich. It's going to be great. We're going to have, money for all the things. We could build this new economy where we could fund niche musicians. We could, fund the development and creation of smaller stuff, like crowdfunding, but with a little bit of different kind of responsibility in there. Some things that might be legal in one place and not in another, or paid for in another place. One place has good health care, one place doesn't, for instance. We could end up with jetpacks. I was always sad that we didn't get jetpacks. I feel like we were promised jetpacks, right? The reason we don't have jetpacks is because insurance companies are like, wait, what? You guys are going to fly around in 3-dimensional space, and you want what? No, we're not doing that. But if we could insure ourselves, all of us who wanted jetpacks, then maybe it would be okay. So that's a thing, we might even be able to manage the 3-dimensional traffic in real time in an inviolable thing, because, timing actually matters when you have a lot of people flying around in jetpacks, and that's one of the things that blockchain is really good at securing and saying, yes, this exactly happened at this time, right? And so, yes, you can take your jetpack in there, which would be great. On the darker end of it, I said before, we have the potential to very efficiently create a situation where the rich get much, much richer very quickly, and then everybody else kind of suffers. This is from a movie called Metropolis, where literally everyone who is not a billionaire lives in the basement. And they work at a factory and crank things for 12 hours a day in gray coveralls. we'll probably still be allowed to have like fun spandex outfits or whatever, but I don't want to live in the basement. Just saying. It's probably going to end up somewhere in the middle. I don't think we're either going to end up with the amazing redistributed wealth hammock wonderland where nobody has to work again, nor the Fritz Lang metropolis except for 12 of us, everyone lives in the basement. But it's probably going to involve more suits than we think. Like this idea of it's going to be this great, power to the people. But like I said, we've already seen a lot of government interest in using blockchain. We've seen a lot of banking, like traditional banks. Goldman Sachs is really interested in blockchain, and they want to see how they can make things happen there, which is when you think about we're redistributing power. I didn't really think of Goldman Sachs as first on the list. Again, they're probably doing okay without us. Another thing that I think is really interesting is the hybrid semi-anonymous but still connected to a bank solution. So DigiCash is an early example of this that got thwarted because of the software patents on it, which I thought was really another thing that we threw by the wayside because of software patents. And it's not that there aren't software patents on other blockchain stuff currently, but the ones that we're holding DigiCash back have expired. So what DigiCash does is it has they have a better anonymization on the way in to the blockchain, but then you still have a thing where the recipient gets money and it goes into an actual bank so they can be audited and taxed and can't take money for weird illegal stuff so easily. So those hybrid solutions might end up actually being pretty good if people were building them. Right now there's DigiCash, and then there's a GNU project called GNU Taller where they're looking at that. It has a ways to go as far as user friendliness, I'll say. But they're writing papers. Like I said, if writing academic papers turns out to be the solution to the utopia where blockchain controls everything, then we're doing our best. There's a lot of papers. The other thing I think about is the social. So we have a lot of kind of lifestyle brands like Facebook and Twitter and Apple, and some of them already have ways to pay within the app. And so on the terrifying things we should try to not have happen, rewarding people for their social behavior as if it were some work in a blockchain system would be pretty terrible. It already feels to me like people are sort of fake on social media, but if not all people, of course, and not all the time, but if we allowed a system where fractional changes in behavior could be financially rewarded on social media, I think that'd be pretty gross. Other companies like Amazon that sell you things, having you be able to do product reviews, because you can already do a product review and get a $5 credit, or a lot of them have bring a friend and you get $10 credit. So companies are already looking at these ways, how can we make it seem how can we financially reward you for pretending to be more excited about our product and our company? And so they're already looking at these things, but if we've got a lot of folks that are not employed or underemployed, then I don't want to see this kind of feudal company town thing where everyone is behaving in the way that the company wants them to behave so that they can get their crumbs and their things delivered. That worries me. So the idea of having work being done on a social network, I think is that we should not build that. There is some legislation that's looking at how to control some of the blockchain stuff. Unfortunately, each country is a little different, but politicians tend to listen to folks who already have more money than they do to individuals. So a lot of the legislation that's being talked about would just make it more efficient and get things out of the way for larger players to come into the space and not necessarily support and bring in smaller players. China actually just recently is looking at legislation, I think it would take effect in the middle of this month, that would make anonymous blockchains illegal. So that's like not for the individual user, that obviously is for the government's interest. So, you know, so the legislation that's being talked about is not going to be like, oh, sweet, we're going to, you know, nothing to like protect individuals is being discussed so much as like, it really all tends to go more towards, we want to make sure the government gets its revenue and its taxes and its share of the you know, this whole thing that is happening. And there's even like a discussion, like it came all the way back around again, where they're like, maybe we should turn our regular like government issued money into like Bitcoin. Let's see, I think Venezuela is talking about this. I don't know if that could possibly help the situation there at all. And then there's like a dude in Puerto Rico who was like, we should just have a Puerto Rican like state level Bitcoin. Yeah, I'm not certain that that person has like the best interests of Puerto Rico at heart. Like it's sort of like, oh, and then, you know, but it would all be me. Like I would issue these coins and then like basically I'd own Puerto Rico. And it's like, So like some of the government issued coins don't have, like, it thwarts the whole decentralization idea that was part of the promise. And then on top of that, it brings it back to this like weird, like, wait, so now instead of like, you know, owing the IRS, we owe the government Bitcoin guy. Like, I don't know how that works. But it's, yeah, again, we would have like this currency being issued without having any of the accountability that we would have, whatever, you know, the diffuse responsibility or accountability that we have with governments currently. And then we've been looking at some of this reminds me of some of the utility deregulation stuff where it's like instead of taking on any responsibility, we just sort of like let the bigger fish eat the smaller fish until there are no small fish. So, what can we do? So first of all, like all of the technology on top of this should remain free and open source software. I think that's really, really critical. Like, if we can at least maintain that level of transparency, I think that's really critical. Also, the conversations that we have about, like, oh, what should we have Bitcoin instead of our regular fiat money for the entire, like, island of Puerto Rico? Like, there should be community voices at the table and not just the person who's willing to fund it. But this is the case in a lot of ways. Like, I think when we let government and business like decide what technology should be possible without community voices at the table, we don't end up with good outcomes. I'd love to see us do more solar power. I don't know if that's like within scope for this room, but maybe you'll get to build something that helps people mine with solar power, and that would be great. It would also kind of like restore some of the historic inequalities that we have built in, where like weirdly the places with less sun have more money. So that would be kind of nice, right? It would be like a good evening out. I also think that, so one of the things that worries me when I see people talking about like disrupting certain systems and replacing them with blockchain is that we haven't even really done a good job of getting electricity and internet to people. So this is from the U.S. like in the 1920s or so, and the like dense places, cities, they all got electrical power right away because it was very lucrative to set up a network for densely populated areas. And then like the rural parts of the country were like, we've been left in the dark, literally. And so they ended up forming citizen utility boards and stringing up their own electrical power because they didn't want to wait for companies to do it. And so they did this. in a lot of different places. It happened again with internet because like companies like Verizon were like, yeah, we're gonna wire up all of Kansas, don't you worry. For folks who are not from the US, Kansas is pretty sparse. So they did Topeka, which is the little dense spot in Kansas, and then they just sort of didn't get around to the blanker spots, and they kept not doing it. They asked for government subsidies to help them with this Herculean task of setting up internet in the rest of the rural parts of Kansas, and then kept coming back every 2 years to be like, it was actually really hard, so we need more money from the government to do the thing we promised to do a couple years ago. So blockchain is built on, it's layered. You can't have it without electricity, and you can't have it without internet. So if we put a lot of important things over there without taking care of the lower layers, then we are really doing a great job of exacerbating the difference between haves and have-nots in our society. Obviously, centralization, if we end up with like 3 blockchain companies instead of 3 other companies controlling all our stuff, that's not good. We need to have a decentralized network. And that means we need to create a system where a lot of different entities can come in. We can't just have like 3 coins or like 1 contract place. So it has to be a whole bunch. And I think we're gonna have to support, in the same way that we would support a citizens utility board or like a neighborhood mesh network, people putting together their own like kind of homegrown types of systems that would compete with the ones that are more funded. So I've given this a lot of thought. I have some more reading if you want to do some more reading on this and take a look at what you may do. And the second one in particular is about the broadband. I work at the Software Freedom Conservancy. That just went by. We have a booth in the K room if you want to come down and talk to us. And then, going the wrong way. Let's see. And then I would be happy to take a couple of questions from you, and then we can break for lunch. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Deb Nicholson. I think we have 5 minutes for questions and answers. Please stay here and don't disturb if there are questions. So are there any questions?
Okay, I'll be over here for a little bit too, like packing up if people want to ask a not for the whole room question.
Okay, thank you again.
Thank you.